Victor Bishop never planned to live in his uncle's old house. He'd inherited it without ceremony. No dramatic reading of a will. No long-forgotten keys handed to him in a leather envelope. Just a notarized letter from a small-town attorney and a deed enclosed in an envelope postmarked 2 weeks after Leon Bishop's death. It had been years since Victor had last spoken to Leon, the family outlier who'd retreated to rural suburbia outside city limits and seemed to live in a world all his own. But the property was paid off, the taxes current, and something about it called to Victor. Maybe it was the stillness he'd been missing after 10 years of cramped city apartments and click-clack commutes. Maybe it was guilt. Or maybe, though he wouldn't admit it at the time, it was the mystery Leon left behind. When he arrived, it wasn't the house that struck him. It was the tension. It didn't have a sound or shape, but Victor felt it the moment he parked. Something in the way the air hung still over the driveway, in the way neighbors slowed their vehicles just enough to be noticed as they passed. The house itself was plain, a one-story ranch style with cracked steps, an aging porch swing, and shutters that could have used paint a decade ago. But it stood like a sentinel, weathered but intact. It hadn't been abandoned. It had been defended. Inside, Victor found boxes neatly labeled, most unopened. A few dated notebooks, spirals filled with Leon's tight, organized handwriting. Lists of phone calls. Diagrams of property lines. A folder marked HOA correspondence, bulging with yellowed letters and violation notices. The earliest was dated nearly 20 years back. The most recent was only 3 weeks before Leon's death. That folder read like a war journal. Victor wasn't naive. He'd heard the HOA horror stories, seen the viral videos, the heated community meetings turned into courtroom dramas. But he assumed they happened in gated neighborhoods, with cookie-cutter homes, and neurotic retirees patrolling Shrub Heights. Not out here. Not in a house technically outside city zoning, with its own well, its own electrical grid, and enough space between homes to pretend neighbors didn't exist. But the Lakefield Preserve Homeowners Association didn't believe in boundaries, at least, not when they were inconvenient. The first week, Victor tried to make sense of it all. He read the HOA letters closely. Most used the same language. You are in violation. You must comply. Failure to respond will result in legal action. The offenses listed were comically vague. Unapproved architectural feature, yard appearance nonconformity, shed proximity to community boundaries. What shed? Victor hadn't even found a shed. And he hadn't responded. Not yet. He wasn't sure he should. The second week, things escalated. He found his mailbox open one morning. The flag bent, a paper jammed inside that wasn't postmarked, just folded and typed in all caps. Cooperation is a condition of good faith. No letterhead. No signature. That afternoon, he discovered a fine white line of chalk across the back end of the property, marking, apparently, where someone else believed his property ended. Victor pulled out Leon's map. It hadn't changed. The house, the back lot, the easement, all of it fell cleanly outside the HOA's jurisdiction. And that wasn't a guess. It was stamped and filed with the county. But the lines on paper didn't seem to matter to the people just over the property line. Karen Morgan appeared on day 19. She didn't knock. She didn't smile. She walked up the front steps as if she'd been there hundreds of times, clipboard in hand, a tight bun and sharper tone. Victor Bishop? She asked. He nodded. I'm Karen Morgan, acting president of the Lakefield Preserve Homeowners Association. Her words hit the air like subpoenas. We need to discuss your integration into our compliance structure. You've already received 3 formal notices. I'm not part of the HOA, he said. She glanced down at the clipboard. That's not entirely accurate. It's accurate on my deed, on my title, on the county parcel map. You can check it yourself. I have. Her smile didn't touch her eyes. But you see, the boundaries have been reevaluated. The association determined, by vote, that the adjacent lots fall under auxiliary influence. This includes your property. Auxiliary influence? He repeated. You just made that up. She didn't flinch. We expect community standards to be met regardless. As you've likely seen, your grass is inconsistent with surrounding aesthetics, and your porch swing violates visual conformity expectations. Victor stepped back. You are trespassing. I'm delivering a compliance notice, she said, holding out a manila envelope. He didn't take it. She left it on the porch. That night, Victor installed cameras. Motion activated. High resolution. Mounted discreetly, and backed up to a cloud server in 3 locations. Then he called the county records office again. No changes. No new zoning. His property remained unincorporated, detached, and legally autonomous. The next day, his water line was severed. It was a clean cut, straight through the PVC, just beyond the meter. Victor didn't make assumptions. He filed a police report, took pictures, and called a plumber. By the following evening, a motion alert on his camera showed someone near the rear of the house. A figure in a Lakefield HOA vest walking with what appeared to be a clipboard and a flashlight. When Victor confronted him, he claimed to be performing visual assessment for landscape compliance. The sheriff was called. The man left before deputies arrived. The footage was filed as evidence. A week later, someone dumped a pile of dried leaves and broken tree limbs over Victor's driveway. Another camera alert. Another call. The officers who arrived didn't laugh, but they didn't seem surprised either. Victor took a different route. He dug into property records. He traced HOA filings. He looked into Karen Morgan herself. And that's when he found it, a lease agreement. Karen, the HOA president, had been renting a secondary property on the other side of the preserve. Not only that, the parcel she rented wasn't actually part of Lakefield HOA either. It belonged to a trust. The trust, as it turned out, was owned by Leon Bishop. Victor owned the land Karen lived on, and he had the paperwork to prove it. Victor didn't react with rage. That wasn't his style. He didn't post the lease online, didn't call a news crew, didn't even knock on Karen Morgan's door. Instead, he poured himself a drink, laid every document out on the dining table his uncle had probably once used to sign them, and began preparing for war, his way. He'd seen enough by now to know that logic alone wouldn't be enough. He needed clarity. Documentation. A strategy. The lease Karen had signed was clear. She was a tenant. Her unit, tucked in a cul-de-sac on the far edge of Lakefield Preserve, sat squarely on land Leon had bought decades ago, before the HOA ever existed. The subdivision had been built around it, a fact the association had tried to bury under a pile of redrawn plat maps and reworded covenants. But the ownership never changed. Leon's trust had continued collecting rent. Now Victor did, which meant the HOA president, who had led a campaign of harassment against him, had been living, unknowingly, on his land. He let the irony breathe. Then he called his lawyer. The courtroom drama that followed wasn't sensationalized. There were no teary witnesses or shouting matches. Just layers of evidence peeled back like old wallpaper, pages of HOA overreach, security footage of trespassing, expert testimony confirming property sabotage, and, of course, the lease. Karen sat at the defense table with her jaw tight and her arms crossed, staring straight ahead as the documents mounted. Victor didn't enjoy watching her squirm. He wasn't there for that. He was there to reclaim peace. The judge didn't hesitate. Not only did the court affirm Victor's property was outside HOA jurisdiction, it found Karen Morgan personally liable for fraudulent filings, illegal entry, conspiracy to commit property damage, and impersonation of a legal authority. The HOA board, already fracturing under the scandal, voted to dissolve within a week of the ruling. Members resigned in droves. Their legal defense fund collapsed. Karen's lease was terminated, legally and formally. She had 30 days to vacate. Victor didn't evict her early. He just watched, from a distance, as she boxed her life into a borrowed U-Haul and drove out of town without speaking to anyone. The house she left behind, modest and forgotten now, stood on land that had been Leon's final move in a long, bitter chess game. Victor thought about that as he locked the gate behind her. The damage she left behind lingered longer, even after the court win, after the official HOA dissolution and the public apologies from a few embarrassed neighbors. The nuisance didn't entirely stop. Letters arrived from county zoning. Random inspections. Claims of code violations Victor knew were fabricated. Once, someone filed a report about illegal livestock, referring, apparently, to 2 feral goats that had wandered onto his land from a neighboring lot. But Victor was ready this time. He countered each claim with precise documentation. He had his own property surveyed again. He filed everything with timestamps, receipts, certified copies. He responded to every bureaucratic jab not with fury, but with facts. He had learned, as Leon had tried to teach him through those notebooks, that proof was more powerful than outrage. And eventually, the harassment stopped. The summer that followed was the first real peace Victor had known since moving in. He tore down the decayed privacy fences along the west side and planted a line of hardy oaks instead. He replaced the cracked porch swing with one he built himself. He painted the shutters dark green, something Leon had scribbled about once in a notebook. "Green fits this place. Makes it disappear." Neighbors started coming by, not with complaints, but with curiosity. They brought pies, old stories about Leon, and in some cases, apologies. It turned out the HOA hadn't just bullied Victor. It had quietly stifled dozens of residents, issuing fines, citing vague rules, and using fear to enforce obedience. Without it, people were learning to be neighbors again, not regulators. In late September, Victor hosted a barbecue. It wasn't big. Just a handful of households. Enough to fill the backyard with the sound of laughter and the smell of smoked ribs. Someone brought a guitar. Kids played tag around the oak saplings. The air was thick with late summer warmth and the strange joy of a place finally allowed to breathe. At the edge of the gathering, an old man Victor didn't know too well, Jim, from 3 lots over, raised a beer and said, "Your uncle fought the good fight. You finished it." Victor smiled. "It's not about fighting," he said. "It's about knowing what's yours and not backing down." As the fire pit crackled and the stars pressed into the dark sky above them, Victor walked the perimeter one more time. No chalk lines. No threatening notes. No clipboard-wielding intruders. Just trees. Earth. Silence. The next morning after the barbecue, Victor Bishop stood barefoot on the duet grass, a mug of black coffee warming his hands as the sun peeled the darkness off the sky. The house behind him no longer looked like a battleground. It looked like a home. A place meant to be left alone, tended quietly, respected by those who lived near it, and feared by those who ever thought about trespassing on it again. The symbolism of it all wasn't lost on him. Leon had spent half a lifetime warding off a neighborhood that never respected boundaries, and Victor had arrived just in time to finish the work. But it didn't feel like revenge. Not now. It felt like balance. The kind of resolution that didn't require celebration, only understanding. The property wasn't just wood and soil, it was a statement. That there was still such a thing as ownership. As space you didn't need to ask permission to exist on. Victor kept improving the place, not to prove anything, but because it felt good. Fixing what was broken. Reclaiming what had been neglected. He tore out the sagging back fence and replaced it with a low stone wall. He landscaped the garden into something wild and native, not to please neighbors, but to feed butterflies and bees. He kept to himself mostly, but not in the hostile way the HOA had tried to paint him. He just didn't need the noise. Still, it lingered in small ways. A letter arrived midwinter, stamped from a county office. "Zoning variance violation," it read, citing an alleged unregistered outbuilding. The building in question? a chicken coop Leon had built nearly 2 decades earlier. It had stood untouched, except by the hens that still scratched the earth beside it, unaware they were part of another bureaucratic ploy. Victor didn't rage. He filed the deed. The photos. The county approval from 2004. The violation vanished. Another came months later. Failure to maintain acceptable exterior lighting. He handled it the same way. Then came one about stormwater runoff and a supposed drainage issue. This one required 3 phone calls and a meeting with a tired municipal inspector who confessed over coffee that someone had filed multiple anonymous complaints in a short span. Victor didn't need names. He didn't need motives. He just needed proof. And he always had it. By the following spring, the whisper stopped. The anonymous complaints ceased. The zoning offices, it seemed, had grown tired of being pawns. And the few former HOA loyalists still clinging to power found themselves alone in a community that had begun to appreciate what it meant to simply live and let others live, too. Victor rarely talked about the fight anymore, but he never forgot it. He kept the HOA correspondence folder in a fireproof cabinet in the back office. Not because he needed it, but because someone might. A neighbor, a friend, or even a stranger knocking at his gate someday with questions about how to stand their ground. He wouldn't give them a speech. He'd hand them copies of documents, suggest where to plant cameras, and tell them what Leon had probably once wanted to tell him. Don't wait to be told you're right. Know it. And live like it. In the 3rd year, Victor made one final change. He removed the last remnant of the HOA from the property. A rusted pole that once held a faded community regulation sign near the corner of the easement. He dug it out by hand. At the base, buried in the soil, he found a small, tarnished metal tag with a serial number. He kept it in his drawer. A trophy, maybe? Or a warning. That summer, he held another gathering. Bigger this time. People from farther out came, those who'd heard the story, or been quietly rooting for him. There were jokes about Karen Morgan, laughs about visual conformity, and even a cake shaped like a clipboard. But beneath the celebration, there was a feeling of something deeper, relief. Resolution. Reclamation. As dusk came on, and the fire pit glowed orange beneath a darkening sky, someone asked him what he planned to do next. Victor shrugged. I'm gonna live here. Same as before. Just without people pretending they can tell me how. And that was that. He didn't need a monument. Didn't need to write a book or give a TED talk. His life was the proof. The house stood straight. The trees grew high. And his neighbors, new and old, understood what the lines meant now. Not just the ones on the map. The ones drawn in conviction. The ones no HOA, no clipboard, and no title game could cross. In the end, Victor didn't just inherit a house. He inherited a fight. A truth. And a way of living that didn't ask permission. He didn't win that by arguing louder. He won it by refusing to move.